So I played Dishonored a few months ago and I very much enjoyed playing that game. Now before, and even more so now due to the poll I put out the other day, it's clear that the first game is the most loved out of the series, I would say, and even though it's the oldest, it still doesn't hold up to the other entries for the majority of people. Now that may not be the case for everyone, but in this video I'll once again be doing an overall review of the game to see if it holds up now in 2024, so almost 8 years later, after the game came out in 2016, 4 years after the first one. Now as far as the base gameplay formula goes, it's of course quite similar, but I'll cover the new additions and changes in a bit. I just want to talk about the world and setting of Dishonored 2. Now the first game was all set in Dunwell, which followed this industrial style city that's inspired by a mixture of London and Edinburgh in the late 1800s. But the game was set in 1837 during the Victorian era, and what I love about not just that setting but the entire franchise is the incredible art style. It has this steampunk design that's tied in so well with the Victorian era. Now for Dishonored 2 it still follows a similar setting but with a few differences. It's set in the year 1852, so 15 years later, and you're still surrounded by Victorian style architecture, but it seems to include a bit more colour than the first game by implementing more vegetation and mountains, which was nice. The actual city is called Karnaca, set in southern Europe, and although I prefer that dark, eerie steampunk art style from the first game, although it's more whale punk actually, which you're still getting in the second game but not as emphasised, I would say I do prefer the actual world design of 2 in terms of it benefiting the gameplay, as you're still getting that similar style but with larger areas and more variety, but both settings are still quite similar and both great. One isn't drastically better than the other, for me anyway. It's one of the best art styles I've seen in a video game and makes the games so unique. I loved the attention to detail, not only in the environment but the characters as well, with the use of jagged and sharp edges on outfits and bodies. Everyone and everything just looks like it's been oil painted, which is also followed on in Deathloop, which is a much more modern and vibrant game, so it'll be interesting to see how that goes. And enough of the setting, the story of Dishonored 2 follows Emily Coldwin, who is the girl that's kidnapped in the intro of the first game. And I don't count that as a spoiler, as it's literally in the game description, as well as the first cutscene. Now in 2, she actually becomes one of the protagonists, and has become this swordsman and the new Empress. However, Dishonored 2 actually allows you to choose between Emily and Corvo, her father, who we played as in the first game of course. Now Emily is the canon character as she is the one on the throne after her late mother, which ties into the story as she is dethroned by Delilah. And then Emily's main goal and journey is to regain the throne, and that's why I recommend to choose her. I mean, it's obviously up to you and how much you care about the story, as after describing it, it's quite straightforward in terms of the plot, and even before playing the first game I knew that wasn't the main focus, and the main focus was the unique and fun gameplay style. So although I would say I preferred the story in the first game, that didn't take away my enjoyment from the game, as it follows a system of a bunch of black box missions, just like a Hitman or Assassin's Creed game, with a couple cutscenes in between each one. And by black box I mean there isn't a linear and fixed outcome or way to go about the mission. The freedom is all in your hands, with the gameplay of Dishonored allowing you to unblock blocked areas in several ways. That could be, you know, you going to find an item and then using the item in multiple areas, or simply finding another way around. You can go loud or stealthily, it's up to you. And the main assassination of the given target can be taken down in many different ways. Loud, stealthily, or using scripted areas. But then again, you still have to find items and get to them for you to do that. So there really is just endless ways and combinations to go about taking down your target. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about and where the fun is. I mean, there's basically cutscenes slotted in between each main mission, and then you're given a summary of how you did after each one. It gives so much replayability to the game and never becomes boring, at least for me anyway. Unless obviously you only do one method every single time and then rush through it. The stealth is so fun to do, and it's even better if you take your time to explore the city and its hidden areas. I mean, if you run past all the guards and, you know, spam attack the target every single time, then of course it will become a bit repetitive and probably frustrating as the game pushes you to do stealth all the time. So the gameplay is definitely what makes it. As I said, I do prefer the first game's narrative, however they both have pros and cons. One big improvement for me was the talking protagonist in Dishonored 2, compared to the first game which used a mute protagonist and one with no lines at all. I've never been a massive fan of mute protagonists in games, and that was an issue with half of the Far Cry games. Having someone actually talking just gives that much more life to it and the character itself, and a little less boring to be honest, depending on the game. The voice acting was also great as well in the other characters, which was a big step up from the first, but also Emily and Corvo themselves. It wasn't cringe or annoying, and I'm glad they made this improvement for the game that had a talking protagonist. Going back to the gameplay and the huge amount of powers that can be used in each mission, which is yet another addition to the massive replayability. By combining these wide selection of powers with the endless ways to play through a mission. I enjoyed the ones from the first game, but in 2 there's added ones and also more of a variety of upgrades to be made to them, with the same runes we could collect around the world, just like Dishonored. Now Emily and Corvo don't share all the same powers, with a few ones only made for one of them. A big one that I used all the time in the first game was Blink, which allows you to teleport where you aim at as long as it's in reach. Now in Dishonored 2 that's only unlocked for Corvo, whereas Emily has a similar one called Far Reach, which doesn't teleport you but basically launches her across, meaning that you're still in sight for the full transition. And Blink is more straightforward, I would say, as it's just you spawning to another location, whereas Far Reach is more combined with parkour, as in you still have that momentum to it, but also launches you further away, as well as being able to grab onto people and items, which I actually preferred. I mean, there's a lot more to it this time, but there is the downside of being seen, though I didn't see it as a massive issue. You just have to be careful, and also there is a bone charm that makes you go invisible when you do that. There's also other new ones like Domino, which can link together multiple enemies, and then whatever you do to one of them will then do the same to the other, and that's great for taking down a massive group of enemies in quick succession, with more enemies to be linked with each rune upgrade. Another cool one was the Shadow Walk, which completely transforms Emily into a shadow version of herself, making her scale down and become faster to then easily pass by enemies or enter small crevices, and then once you assassinate someone while in the shadow state, then she instantly returns back straight away, and then upgrading can allow you to take down more or become even faster, for example. There's quite a few new powers, which is a great switch up from the first gameplay, as well as the previous ones which can be used, so I would still recommend playing as Corvo as well as Emily, because there's quite a few differences in the powers I mentioned, but also the interactions with characters, the voice acting, although I prefer Emily, and also their movement and fighting style, which I'll get into later. And there's still the bone charms we had before that allow for an extra boost in certain areas, like powers, movement, restoration, weapons, combat, and a load more. Could be Bird of Prey, which gains health when you perform a drop assassination, or Assassin's Fortune, which increases the chance of bolt packs having an extra bolt included in them. Acrobat makes climbing speed faster, etc. There's a massive selection, and although they're just small boosts, they're a great benefit, and of course several can be used at once. Now the combat compared to the first entry, I must say, isn't as good, unfortunately. I do think the powers and animations do make up for it, but in terms of the feeling of the combat, it's just not as smooth and feels a little clunky, and that's why I anticipate every single scripted animation of the fight, because they look so brutal but also very clean, with a good variety of assassinations, so you know, fights don't become so repetitive. And as I said, it makes up for the actual fighting mechanics. As long as the finisher and the style of combat is good, then I don't really mind that much. Corvo and Emily do differ in their combat, with Emily's fighting style being more agile, and that goes the same with movement and their running parkour animations. So the base melee combat doesn't change or upgrade an awful lot like throughout the game, but as I covered, the powers and upgrades and weapons are what switch up the gameplay entirely, but also just how you decide to plan your mission's route. And I think that's where I end my review of Dishonored 2 in 2024. A great extension to the first game, and although there's, you know, small differences that let it down slightly, but also some great changes from the first one. I had just as much fun with this one, and as I said, at the end of the day, the gameplay is what makes this series, which always is so flexible in how you want to play, and so fun. Mix that with such a unique and incredible art style, I'll always love this franchise, which I'll carry on recommending for ages. If you did enjoy this video, then let me know by tapping that like button down below, and if you like single player games, then that's what this channel is all about. But there's also the odd multiplayer game as well. I have lots of reviews on many games, and there's a playlist of a series I've done in the description. Also, if you'd like to support the channel by becoming a member at either level 1 or 2, to gain access to many perks, then tap the join button below, but there'll also be a link in the description. Thank you all for the support and watching until the very end. That was Dishonored 2, and bye bye.